8 years. That's the stretch of time I dedicated to Ashbridge Solutions. 8 years filled with dawns that came too early, nights that stretched too late, holidays I skipped, and birthdays I missed. I was their lead systems architect, the go-to person whenever things caught fire. And somehow, I always managed to douse the flames. Then one gray Wednesday afternoon, all I received in return was a frosty smile and 6 words that flipped everything upside down. Your services are no longer needed, I'm Tessa Monroe, and this is the story of how they tried to erase me, and how I made sure the world wouldn't forget. Instead, the day began just like any other. I'd spent the morning poring over the latest integration reports for Nexus Core, the AI-powered operations platform I had painstakingly built from scratch. It was finally stable, intelligent, and only days away from its big investor debut. Months of restless nights had gone into tuning every line of code. This was more than a project. It was my legacy then. At 3:15 p.m., I got an urgent email, a meeting request with Charles, the CEO, and HR, no subject. No hint why that's when the tightness squeezed my chest, laptop in hand. I strode down the glass corridor to my left. The dev lab hummed softly. The servers I personally built and configured, running our core systems. To my right, I passed framed snapshots of company milestones, each one featuring Charles. Not one showed me. Even though I'd been there through all of them, I stepped into the conference room. Charles sat at the table's head, fingers steepled, eyes gleaming with the smug certainty of someone convinced they'd won. Next to him sat Margaret from HR, avoiding my gaze. "Tessa," Charles said, his tone scripted and cold, "we appreciate all your contributions, but we're taking the company in a new direction, effective immediately. Your role is terminated." No warning, no gratitude, just hollow corporate speak draped over betrayal. I held my expression steady. I'd learned long ago that silence rattles people far more than anger. "Of course," I replied evenly. "Shall I hand over my laptop now?" Margaret blinked, clearly caught off guard by my composure. "Yes," Charles said with a satisfied nod. "That would be best." I placed the laptop gently on the table and rose. 2 security guards waited just outside as they flanked me. I glanced back at Charles one final time. "Good luck with tomorrow's investor meeting," I said, a small smile curling my lips. "Without me?" He raised an eyebrow. "We'll manage." I smiled wider. "Let's hope so." The elevator doors slid shut, swallowing Charles from sight behind polished steel. And then the countdown began: system failure in 9 minutes. What he didn't realize, what no one did, was that Nexus Core had an integrity fail-safe embedded, triggered only if my credentials were removed, a last-ditch safeguard, not to destroy the system, but to protect it. Because I'd learned the hard way that the most dangerous threats don't come from outside hackers. They come from within, from people like Charles, who grin while stealing what isn't theirs. Half a year earlier, I'd noticed unusual server pings in the dead of night, when no one should have been logged in. Files being copied, logs tampered with. I traced the activity back to an account linked to Charles's executive assistant. I kept quiet, quietly building an invisible security shell around the core, something no one else could see or comprehend. It wasn't sabotage. It was insurance. They believed they were cutting me out. Instead, they were cutting out the only person who truly understood Nexus Core inside and out. The elevator opened to the lobby. I stepped out carrying a single cardboard box, photos, a small potted succulent, and a USB drive containing nothing they'd expect. But everything they needed. I wasn't angry, not even surprised. Because betrayal, when anticipated, doesn't cut the same outside. The sky had darkened, mirroring the storm brewing inside Ashbridge Solutions. While they toasted their fleeting victory upstairs, 9 minutes ticked down toward the moment they'd realize what they'd truly lost. The architect, the mind, the person who built it all, and the only one who could fix what was about to break. 9 minutes. That was all it took. At minute 1, the system logged a critical authentication error. By minute 3, internal processes began looping endlessly. At 6 minutes, the dashboard flooded with anomalies. Nexus Core's AI flagged multiple subsystems as unstable red warnings blinked on every engineer's monitor. And by minute 9, the entire platform crashed. Not just a typical failure, the kind that causes even the toughest IT leads to freeze in disbelief. Investors were due to see the demo the next morning, but the system lay in total chaos, with no obvious way to restore it. I pictured the moment Charles realized what had happened, how his smile vanished, how his illusion of control shattered, but I wasn't there to witness it. Instead, I sat on my couch in my modest apartment, sipping chamomile tea like nothing had changed. The TV played a mindless reality dating show I barely registered. I let the background noise fill the quiet as I stared at my phone. No calls yet. Then, exactly at 5:12 p.m., it rang, an unknown number I already knew who it was. "Tessa, it's me," a hurried voice said. Eli, Ashbridge's lead systems engineer, one of the few people at the company I truly respected. "Don't tell anyone I said this, but the system's completely down. Charles is panicking. They think it's sabotage." I smiled. "And what's your take, Eli?" "I think you created something too smart to be handled like this. And I think Charles is finally learning what happens when you burn the person holding it all together." He hesitated. "They're going to call you," he whispered. "They need you." And he was right. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Rachel, Charles's assistant. "Charles wants to speak with you," she said stiffly. "It's urgent. A car will be there within the hour." I almost laughed. "Tell him I'm busy," I replied. "Maybe tomorrow." A pause. "Tessa, please." That simple plea said it all. They weren't just annoyed. They were terrified Nexus Core wasn't just a product. It was the foundation of their investor pitch, their valuation, their future. And now, it was broken, useless. I stood and went to my desk, opening a small drawer where I kept a sleek black USB drive, the one holding the key not to sabotage, but to restore stability. What Charles and the board never grasped was that Nexus Core wasn't just software. It was built with ethical protocols, a living intelligence designed to evolve, but only under the control of trusted, authorized inputs. I had woven a central logic framework deep inside the core. Trust had to be earned. Credentials can be revoked. Loyalty? That can't be faked. When they kicked me out of the system, they unknowingly triggered a protocol breach. The AI took the removal of its architect, me, as a hostile event, and reacted exactly as it was programmed to. By protecting itself, it quarantined suspicious commands and shut down risky inputs. By 7 p.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Charles himself. Trying to sound calm, he said, "Tessa, we've run into an unexpected glitch. I believe there's an authentication bug." "A bug?" I echoed, feigning surprise. "Yes. We'd appreciate your help fixing it." I pretended to ponder for a moment. "Is this a freelance gig? Or am I back on the payroll?" Silence. Then a sigh. "We'll discuss that once you're here." I made him wait another hour before agreeing to show up. When I finally arrived at Ashbridge's headquarters, chaos reigned. Engineers hurried back and forth, alarms still blinking on monitors, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Charles met me in the executive boardroom, his tie loosened, hair rumpled. He looked like a man who just lost everything, but hadn't yet realized he was lucky I'd even come. "Can you fix it?" he asked. I pulled the USB drive from my coat pocket and placed it carefully on the gleaming mahogany table. I can, I said, my voice steady. But first, we need to talk. He narrowed his eyes. You really think you're in a position to negotiate? I leaned in, unwavering. I do. Because the power has shifted. I'm not just the woman you discarded. I'm the key to the entire system you gambled your future on, and I don't intend to hand it back for free. Charles stared at the USB like it was a ticking bomb. This has the fix? He asked, voice tight. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence drag on until he squirmed. His foot tapped impatiently beneath the table, jaw clenched like he was biting glass. At last, I said, this contains the protocol update. The system functions exactly as designed, but it no longer recognizes you, or anyone at Ashbridge, as a trusted authority. He scoffed. That's ridiculous. We own it. We paid for it. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. You paid for a product. You didn't pay for understanding. And you certainly didn't pay for loyalty. His face reddened, but he said nothing. He couldn't argue. He knew the upper hand was gone. I stood and walked to the window overlooking the city skyline. From here, Ashbridge looked formidable, but I knew the truth. The foundation was fragile. I gave you 8 years, I said quietly, and you tossed me aside like I was nothing. No warning, no meeting, not even a thank you. Charles stayed silent. I turned back to face him. You didn't just fire me. You removed the person who built your entire infrastructure without the decency of a conversation. And now, the very system you want to show off to investors doesn't trust you. Tell me, Charles, how does that look from the outside? He flinched just slightly, a small crack that told me reality had finally settled in. Tell me what you want, he muttered. There it was, the shift I'd been waiting for. I want full recognition as Nexus Corps' lead architect, I said evenly. My name on every document, every patent, every press release. You make me a ghost. I make your system vanish. Fair trade? Charles swallowed hard. What else? 25% equity in the platform, I added, retroactively vested, and a seat on the board. His eyes widened. You're insane. The board will never agree. They will, I cut in, if they want investors showing up tomorrow, because without that update, you don't have a demo. You have an expensive failure. He leaned back, exhaling slowly like a bull holding back a charge. Silence stretched as he weighed his options. You planned this, he finally said, eyes narrowing. You set us up. No, I replied. I protected what I built. Another long pause, then a slow nod. I'll need it in writing. You'll have it by morning, he muttered. No, I said firmly. Tonight, before I hand over anything. His gaze sharpened. You don't trust me? I smiled. You fired me. We stared across the boardroom table, a silent battle fought through posture and expression. Finally, he stood and motioned to Rachel, who had been waiting quietly outside the glass door. Call legal. Now. 3 hours later, the paperwork was drafted, sent to my attorney, edited, and returned with digital signatures. I didn't even blink when Charles tried cutting my equity from 25% to 20% in the third draft. I stood, grabbed the USB, and walked to the door. If the paperwork isn't exactly what we agreed, I paused with my hand on the knob. The system stays down, and so does your company. Rachel handed me the corrected version 5 minutes later. With the contract signed and legally binding, I returned to the table and slid the USB toward him. This will restore system trust protocols and full functionality, I said, but it will also initiate an oversight loop, reporting every admin change back to me. From now on, if you try to sideline me again, Nexus Corps will know, and it will act accordingly. Charles looked at the drive like it had sprouted teeth, but he didn't argue, just nodded, whispering, "Understood." I turned to leave, my heels clicking on the cold marble floor. Just as I reached the elevator, Charles called out, "Tessa!" I paused. "You could have burned us to the ground," he said quietly. "Why didn't you?" I glanced over my shoulder. Because I didn't build Nexus Core to destroy. I built it to protect, especially myself. With that, the elevator doors closed again. But this time, I wasn't being escorted out in disgrace. This time, I was rising. The next morning, I walked into Ashbridge Solutions through the front doors. No visitor badge, no security escorts. Just me, a returning architect, armed with a signed agreement and a digital record of my reinstatement filed with HR before dawn. People looked up as I passed, some surprised, some wary, others quietly relieved. Eli met me near the dev pit, his eyes saying what words couldn't. "You really did it," he whispered. "I'm not here for revenge," I told him. "I'm here to make sure no one touches Nexus Core without understanding what they're holding." But honestly, a part of me did want revenge. Maybe not in flames and fury, but in recognition, in finally being seen. After 8 years in the shadows, there was something thrilling about walking those halls like I belonged, and knowing everyone else knew it too. Charles didn't look at me during the investor demo. He delivered the usual corporate pitch: the future of automation, adaptive security, scalable intelligence. But the moment he introduced Nexus Core, his tone shifted. "And now," he said, forcing a practiced smile, "I'd like to present the system's original architect, our co-lead developer and strategic advisor, Tessa Monroe." There it was, not just a passing mention, but a title, recognition, validation. The room full of investors turned their attention to me as I walked to the front. "Good morning," I began. "What you're about to witness isn't merely a platform. It's a system designed to think, adapt, and most importantly, protect. Not only from outside threats, but from those within. Nexus Core isn't reactive. It's predictive. And above all, it remembers who built it." That line earned a few raised eyebrows. I didn't care. I wasn't here to be subtle. We ran the demo. Nexus Core neutralized 5 complex simulated threats in real time. No glitches, no delays, not even a flicker. When the final test wrapped up, the room buzzed with excited whispers. Some investors moved toward Charles, already talking numbers. Others approached me directly, asking about scalability, expansion, and partnerships. For once, they saw the mind behind the magic, not just the brand. Later that afternoon, Charles called me into his office. "You made an impression," he said without looking up from his screen. "I wasn't trying to impress," I replied. "Just doing my job." He finally met my gaze, tired but sharper than I'd seen in weeks. "Some board members think we should keep you more involved officially." I raised an eyebrow. "And you?" "You're dangerous," he said flatly. "But necessary," I smiled. "You should have realized that years ago." He said nothing, and I didn't wait for a response. The weeks that followed were complicated. I wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms. Murmurs and meetings buzzed behind closed doors. Some whispered that I'd blackmailed my way back in. Others avoided me, unsure whose story to trust. But I didn't need their approval. I had something far more important: access, oversight, and proof that I belonged. One afternoon, while reviewing audit logs, I spotted something odd. Nexus Core had flagged several access attempts from restricted admin accounts, days after I'd returned. All traced back to the finance department. Digging deeper, I discovered partial downloads of source code documentation, encrypted, fragmented, but unmistakably mine. The next morning, I confronted Charles. "Why is someone in your finance team trying to duplicate core files?" I asked, sliding a printed log summary across his desk. He barely glanced at it. "I don't know. I'll look into it." "No," I said, voice low. "I will." That night, Nexus Core sent me a high-level threat alert. Internal breach. Risk level. Critical. The system had detected a new pattern, one I hadn't anticipated. Someone was trying to clone the platform, not destroy it, not alter it, but quietly copy it, spin it off under a different name, one without me attached. Charles had signed my return agreement, but someone else still wanted me gone. This time without the drama. They hadn't learned the first time. But this time, I wouldn't just defend myself. I'd defend everything I built, and I wouldn't be alone. The first rule in tech: trust the system, not the people. I learned that the hard way. Nexus Core was always more than software. It was my creation, a blueprint for intelligent protection. Now it whispered warnings. Someone inside was quietly, persistently trying to replicate its code, and they were dangerously close. Audit logs showed encrypted data requests routed through VPN masks and disguised admin credentials. But the intruder underestimated Nexus Core's watchful eye. It didn't rely on access logs alone. It monitored patterns, behaviors, frequencies, anomalies. The culprit wasn't careful, always working between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., accessing the same folders, the same strings of code tied to the neural prediction engine, the very heart of Nexus Core. I set a digital tripwire. Nothing obvious. Just a bait line nested deep inside a documentation packet. Useless at first glance, but if touched, it triggered a silent alert straight to me. At 2:41 a.m. on Friday, someone took the bait. I froze when the ping hit. The credentials weren't random. They belonged to Rachel, Charles's executive assistant. The same Rachel who called me the night I was fired. The one who stood silently outside his office as I negotiated my return. The one who smiled at me every morning like nothing had happened. Only now I saw that smile had always been hiding something. The next day, I requested full access logs tied to her account. What I found was damning. Over 40 unauthorized code pulls in 6 weeks. Multiple download attempts masked as internal audits. 2 outbound transfers to an unlisted domain. And this is the part that chilled me. The domain didn't belong to a competitor. It belonged to Ashbridge Ventures, a shell subsidiary I'd never heard of, but one Charles quietly created 3 months earlier. Cross-referencing internal filings revealed Charles as the primary executive officer, and Rachel listed as co-founder. They weren't just trying to push me out again. They were spinning off Nexus Core behind my back, rebranding it, stripping my name from patents, selling the clone to investors while keeping the original running just long enough to cover their tracks. This wasn't corporate greed anymore. It was daylight theft. But they forgot one thing. I'd built the system to fight back. That night, I activated Phase 2 of the protection protocol, a kill switch buried in the secondary authentication layer. It wasn't destructive, but disruptive. Every unauthorized code access would flood the intruder's session with false data. Fabricated algorithms, scrambled version histories, decoy prototypes designed to look real but lead nowhere. To a thief, it'd seem like they'd stolen the crown jewels. But in reality, they were holding glass, and I was ready to let them choke on it. The next morning, Charles summoned me to his office. His face was pale, jaw tight. "We need to talk," he said. No greeting, no pleasantries. "I assumed as much," I replied, stepping inside. He held up a tablet, turning it toward me. On the screen, a jumble of code, broken strings, failed scripts. What used to be the neural engine now looked like corrupted garbage. "This came from the internal development backup," Charles said, his voice tight. "It's scrambled. Looks like someone accessed it without clearance." I kept my voice steady. "Nexus Core has built-in defenses against unauthorized duplication." Charles stood abruptly. "Tessa, if you sabotaged—" "I haven't sabotaged anything," I interrupted firmly. "Nexus Core is working exactly as intended. It protects itself, even from you." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "And if I told you this has already gone too far?" he asked. Investors were promised a new version, an expansion under a new entity. I tilted my head, amused. "Then I'd say you're about to have a very uncomfortable board meeting." Hatred crept into his expression, the kind that surfaces when someone realizes they've been outplayed at their own game. "You don't get to win this," he muttered quietly. I smiled. "I already have. You just haven't read the source code yet." With that, I turned and left him there, left him to wonder which parts of his empire were still standing, and which had already crumbled beneath the weight of his own deception. But I wasn't finished. My next move wasn't just defense. It was about making sure no one could ever steal from me again. 3 days later, the board convened an emergency meeting, not called by Charles, called by me. I'd sent a formal report to every board member, complete with evidence: access logs, security alerts, file transfer records, documentation on Ashbridge Ventures, the shell company. A fully time-stamped trail exposing the attempted theft of Nexus Core's source code and the deliberate effort to cut me out. No embellishment needed. The truth was damning enough. Charles walked in 20 minutes late, looking gaunt, like he hadn't slept. Rachel didn't show up at all. As the board examined my documents, silence fell. Some faces were shocked, others unsurprised but cautious. No one spoke until the last page turned. Then Evelyn Sharp, the no-nonsense board chairwoman who once called me brilliant but too quiet, folded her hands and fixed Charles with a stare. "Do you deny any of this?" Charles cleared his throat. "Rachel acted alone." I leaned forward. "Charles is listed as the majority shareholder of Ashbridge Ventures. Rachel is a secondary officer. The transfers came from her account, but the project was his." He said nothing. Evelyn turned to me. "And Nexus Core?" I nodded. "Fully operational. The original is stable, secure, intact. The cloned version is flooded with decoy code and misdirection. Irreparable. The working system is under my direct oversight." One board member asked, "Can it still be stolen?" "No," I replied, "because it no longer trusts anyone without my biometric authorization. And yes, I'm happy to include independent verification teams going forward. From now on, Nexus Core protects itself, legally and technically." There was a long pause before Evelyn closed the folder. "I think it's time for a change." The vote was unanimous. Charles was removed as CEO within the hour. Rachel's employment was terminated retroactively. Ashbridge Ventures was dissolved. The board named me interim CTO and gave me controlling interest in Nexus Core's future. But that wasn't what satisfied me most. For the first time in 8 years, I didn't have to prove my worth. It was documented, sealed, recognized. Over the following weeks, I worked to rebuild trust with engineers, product teams, even the legal department who now addressed me by name, not just as the tech lead. Nexus Core's investor launch went ahead on schedule. Within 2 weeks, we signed 5 major contracts, including one with a global healthcare provider who'd lost millions to cybersecurity breaches the year before. I stood at the front during the product reveal, not a shadow behind the screen anymore, but the face of the future. And in those final moments, as applause echoed through the room, my smartwatch buzzed silently. System status: secure. Threats neutralized. Integrity restored. Protections active. I smiled. Nexus Core wasn't just my work anymore. It was my armor. In the months that followed, I ensured every new iteration carried the same core principles: ethics first, ownership protected, transparency enforced. We didn't just build smarter systems, we built safer ones, not just against hackers or viruses, but against greed, betrayal, and silence. One quiet afternoon, a young developer named Mariah knocked on my office door. She was new, wide-eyed, brilliant, fresh out of grad school. assigned to one of our AI behavior modules. "Can I ask you something?" she said nervously. "How do you know when to fight? When to push back? When to walk away?" I thought about it a moment. "I didn't," I admitted. "Not always, but I learned to tell the difference between defending my ego and defending my work. When someone tried to take what I built, not because they understood it, but because they thought they could, that's when I knew." Mariah nodded slowly, as if filing those words away for a time she hoped would never come. Then I added one last thing. "Protect what you build, whether it's code, an idea, or your peace of mind. Not because someone will try to steal it, but so when they do, you're ready." That's the message I want to leave you with. What would you do if someone tried to erase your name from something you spent years building? Would you walk away quietly, or would you find a way to make them remember? Justice doesn't always come how we expect. But sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is stand back up, reclaim your place, and let the system you built speak for itself. Because integrity can't be stolen. It can only be protected.